Computer. So good morning from the UK and good evening in Australia. We're now going to hear from Robert Burrowes in Australia.
Thank you, Nigel. In Australia, responsibility for health policy largely rests with the state government, so there's some differentiation between what's happening in one state to another. But generally in Australia at the moment, no lockdowns. Nevertheless, enormous pressure being applied to get the vaccination, and whether that's through mandates by employers or the ongoing pressure through the media and so on, there is a tremendous push to get well, in fact, now we're up to the third shot, the booster shot so-called. And obviously for those who haven't had either of the first two yet as well. One of the two big success stories of the month, since the last report anyway, is that we've had 4 successive weekends, Saturdays in Melbourne, and other states, capital cities as well, and a lot of the regional cities where we've had fairly significant demonstrations. So, for example, in Melbourne, 4 Saturdays in a row with over 100,000 people, with estimates varying from a touch under 100,000 even by the police to significantly over 100. So it's a huge jump on the 5,000 or so that was turning up until quite recently. These rallies have been organised by a range of local groups, but obviously some of them are well connected with, say, worldwide demonstration or Millions March Against Mandatory Vaccinations and so on. But a lot of groups involved, and separately from that, we've got a lot of involvement from other key groups doing different parts of the struggle. So, for example, there's Concerned Lawyers Network, does a lot of legal work. There's a whole range of professional groups, trade groups involved around the theme Reclaim the Line. And so there's an ever increasing, it seems, number of individuals and groups mobilising in response to the work that activists have done up till date. For example, that's starting to show impact in some interesting areas. So, for example, Police for Freedom, that's been working consistently from fairly early days to sort of try and get a better connection with the police and so on, is starting to have increasing impact, and some police have resigned recently, as you would already know. And there's increasing signs of police acting in solidarity with activists, and probably being out of lockdown has helped that enormously. On the other hand, it's a good positive sign that that is happening. And an example of that is recently there's been a draconian bill before the Victorian Parliament, and there's been a presence outside the Parliament, but the police and the activists have been playing cricket together outside the Victorian Parliament House. So I think that sort of sums up the improvement in connections. And of course, there's debate within the activist circles about whether that's appropriate or not, given what's happened in the past. Anyway, but as I say, the key thing to recognise is that we have had a fairly profound increase in the numbers and groups involved in the last month or two, and that's been a really huge and important development. The second thing that's of real note is that about a week ago, a group of Indigenous elders from the Northern Territory, which is the North Central state of territory of Australia, state if you like, they got together and they prepared a statement, and Lernpa, who is the representative of the group, spoke for about 18 minutes into a video in the presence of the other elders, asking for help because the isolated Aboriginal communities in the Northern Territory were being threatened with mandatory vaccination, and that had started, and also forced quarantining. It was a very evocative appeal, and many of us have played a part in trying to get the word out so that more people are aware of what's going on. But I think it sums up the comments that were being made earlier in this meeting by others from the World WFA meeting in Copenhagen. I mean, there's no point pretending there isn't a eugenics agenda to this whole operation, and genocide is the appropriate word. And obviously, tragically, the Indigenous people of this country have been the victims of that for 233 years already. That's ongoing. The other thing that needs to be mentioned is that, as I did touch on, the Victorian government has got some very draconian legislation before it at this moment, and the decision on that will be made by both the upper and lower house in the next 24 hours or so. Well, that's how it looks at the moment. As I mentioned in the report last time, the essence of that bill is it will remove most of the human rights that we've taken for granted since we fought for them since the Magna Carta, or built on the Magna Carta. And the great tragedy is that that bill will probably be passed, and that will mean that the struggle in this state will pick up a bit. But again, as I never fail to mention, the entire deeper agenda is being applied differentially around the world. And so, what's coming to us is coming to you, and what's happening in your place that's the worst is coming to us if we haven't got it already. So I think it's important that we recognise that. Probably a key weakness, as I mention each time just briefly, is that I think getting the discussion off the vaccines is difficult. Getting it off what state governments in Australia are doing is difficult. Very hard to get activists generally, and it doesn't matter where they are, whether they're doctors, lawyers, nurses, other professional groups, trades groups, to see beyond the vaccines and the state government is difficult. The concept of the Great Reset, its entire fourth industrial revolution agenda, the transhumanist agenda, the eugenics agenda, Cyber Polygon, and so on. To be honest, very low awareness still in Australia, as the rest of the world, as I observe it. Difficult to get the word on that out. Having said that, some of us work on that fairly consistently, and the We Are Human, We Are Free campaign is one part of the effort to sort of get the word on that out more effectively, and also to give people appropriately effective and strategic responses to it. Having said all that, thanks, Nigel. Having said all that, I think Australia is mobilising now in a way it hasn't up until now. This last month particularly has demonstrated that all capital cities of Australia, large regional cities, have been very active on the weekends, more planned for this weekend. And I think with a bit of luck, we can, get a bit more the deeper understanding into sections of that activist community, so that we can have a real crack at this deeper agenda. It's obviously going to take time. Probably that's some part of it that people don't want to know generally, but we've got no choice. We're going to have to deal with that. It's not going away. But yeah, pretty upbeat this week from Australia. And I think I go back and just finish with that evocative appeal from Australia's Indigenous people. Again, 233 years of genocide they've faced already. And mobilising support for them now is obviously a priority.
Wonderful report as always, Robert. Thank you. I've put the link up here to We Are Human, We Are Free. I've put the PDF flyer on there. But what I'm trying to do in the UK, because the movements in the UK are now gathering together and trying to work out what programme we need to have, and people are still running around on the wrong level. We're playing a game called Whack-A-Mole, which is a game that you play in fairgrounds where you hit a mole. Every time the mole comes up, you hit it on the head. And that's what we're doing with vaccines and vaccine passports. And what we're doing by doing that is taking our attention off the bigger agenda. And I'm going to encourage the groups in the UK to see if we can adopt We Are Human, We Are Free's programme universally across the world. And I think that's a role that the World Freedom Alliance can play to see if we can get concerted actions across the world. Protests are great. We've talked about this many times on these calls, that protests are fantastic, but there have to be actions. And these are some very simple actions that we can all do. And if we all did these across the world, pay with cash and switch to community-owned banks, grow your own food, join local trading schemes, if all of us did that around the world, we would end this agenda. So we do have to get everybody working on that agenda together. Really appreciate your report, Robert. Thank you.